Welcome to this flight of the Retail Pilot. I'm Ken Pilot, former CEO and current brand advisor, investor, and board member. I'm thrilled to share with you some of the insights from retail's leaders and legends, as well as my perspective on retail today. This podcast is sponsored by the following. Want to drive more traffic and conversions on your e-commerce site? Brands that use video see 41% more traffic from search engines. And that's just the start. Meet Firework, the leader in AI-powered video commerce. Trusted by brands like L'Oreal and Unilever, Firework turns any page into an immersive, shoppable experience. From pre-recorded long-form content to short-form and everything in between. With Firework, you can easily integrate social media videos into your product pages and run pre-recorded digital showrooms with shoppable content. Plus, Firework offers AI-powered virtual assistants to personalize shopper experience and drive higher conversion. That's why I'm an investor and advisor. Learn more at firework.com. Welcome to this special flight of the Retail Pilot. This is Ken Pilot, your host, and today we are talking tariffs. I am joined by J Rogers Kniffen, CEO of J Rogers Kniffen Worldwide Consultancy, former retail executive, CNBC contributor, frequent co-pilot on this podcast, and retail opinion expert at large. We also have Bear Clark, Chief Innovation Instigator at Ear Micro. Bear has personally written 35 patents and counting, nearly 30 of which are in the earphone, headphone, and hearable space. Bear designed the very first smart, app-enabled headphones for audio stalwart, Denon Electronics in 2011, ushering in the age of the hearable as it's known today. And finally, we have Adrian Miramontes, CFO and COO of women's apparel brand Boston Proper. Adrian also served in financial and planning roles with Chico's for 4 years. Gentlemen, welcome to the Retail Pilot. We're ready to talk a little bit about tariffs?
Think so.
I hope
For
so.
sure.
Yeah, about a week ago, I posted something on LinkedIn that I think most of you had seen prior to yesterday, speaking aggressively against the current state of tariffs in the United States and asking our president. I actually penned the note to our president, asking him to do something quickly, to not onshore production and try to go set the clock back 30, 40 years to when America was in its heyday of producing apparel, footwear, and other great products. And I asked him to do it quickly, as many of my friends and colleagues in the industry today are suffering the fate of uncertainty and also onerous tariffs, if not an actual trade embargo that he has imposed on China. I had many positive responses to my post. In fact, it was one of the better posts that I had until yesterday. There was a dissenter, and I recognized the name of that dissenter, and I decided to invite him on today because he is one of the smartest guys I know. And we also did business together. He was my manufacturer of my fixtures when I was founding Robot Galaxy in 2006-07. Bear, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you were doing then?
You betcha. Well, I was very lucky to have a career that started in retail at about age 3, because anytime we would go into a store someplace, inevitably, even when I was stroller bound, the clerks would say to my mother, when he's 14 or 15, bring him back. He's a salesman. And so really, retail is in my blood. And I founded a business in 1991 that designed and built retail displays, interactive kiosks, and electronic systems to help retailers merchandise their wares in an interactive and fun way. And we built that business for a little over 20 years. To pretty good size. And we were proud to open 2 international offices. And at our peak, we were exporting about 50% of what we made right here in Kansas City to places as far away as Saudi Arabia or Chile or Russia, back when it was still called Russia. That's been around a while, I guess. But in any event, we did build a great manufacturing business in retail with over 150 people. And those days came to an end eventually. And I think that's what informs my opinion a bit.
Now, where obviously it came to an end because of all the pressures that were brought upon us by cheaper manufacturing. I guess that's pretty much what you called out in your post, in your reply to me. Was it the manufacturing cost? Was it what other factors just brought the business to its close?
It's funny. I remember the first time that we ever went up on a bid with a major retailer, and it was Lowe's Home Improvement at the time. And we were designing and building the Delta Tools crib, or the whole cage structure and the merchandising that was going to support Delta Tools at Lowe's and Home Depot and others. And they had asked for a really competitive bid and had specifically suggested, and this was in about 2005 or 6, that to be competitive, they imagined that a winning bidder would probably need to include some sourcing from China. And I remember getting that RFQ and thinking, what? Over my dead body. We build these products 100% in the United States with a trained workforce that's dedicated, loyal, and fantastically hardworking. I don't believe that we need to do that to win the bid. And as it turned out in that instance, we did not. And we did win the bid. And we did do it 100% in America, as we always had. Fast forward just a few years, and by 2010, we were hearing the word China in almost every competitive bidding situation, but we were still winning the bids. How did we do that? Lowering our margins, right? And so little bit by little bit, we thought, we'll put up the fight. We're going to hold our ground here, and we're going to teach our retail partners, many of whom we've done business with for 15 or 20 years, that you don't have to go overseas to keep getting competitive prices. But as everybody understands, there's a point in time where you can lower your margin no further. By the end of the Great Recession in 2010, 2011, we weren't just losing bids. I would call these retail partners, again, people I knew well, and I would say, how much did we lose the bid by? And on one really pivotal final bid, it was a $15 million bid. The winning bid out of China was $7.5 million, exactly half what we had bid. Our cost of materials alone, and understand, in the retail manufacturer or in the display fixture business, we're using wood and steel, right? And plastics and glass. We're using commodities. Commodity pricing around the world is pretty much the same. And so to lose a bid where the winners done, delivered, installed in the United States, shipped across an ocean, labor, everything is less than our raw cost of materials was an absolute eye-opener. And the more we dug in and really studied what was going on, why we were losing more and more bids, and then eventually why we couldn't win any bids, was Chinese subsidies. And they did this very targeted. They're very smart. They did it industry by industry. So all of us on this chat will remember when televisions were made in the United States, right? Or microwave ovens, or refrigerators, or dishwashers, or cars. And then we remember Walmart used to be what? Made in America. You'd see it, right? Underneath their mascot, their banner head. And it just never occurred to us that some other nation would be so cunning, so smart. And I don't hold this against the Chinese people. I don't hold it against the Chinese government. We provided them with a field where cheating was okay. And that cheating meant that industry after another, year after year, increasing and now accelerating in pace, and then really tipped over the edge by the Great Recession and people having to source more effectively. Folks that had never considered trying something sourced in China suddenly had their first little hit. And that became a gateway drug. And soon enough, the Chinese were doing well with it. And they were putting companies like ours out of business, companies in many industries out of business.
But it's interesting, you go back to the 1970s, 60s, 70s, and Jan, you can comment on these numbers if they're not correct. But about 70% of all that we were wearing, all the apparel and all the footwear that we were wearing and buying was made in the United States. Today, it's a little less than 8% in total. So that playing field, certainly the production and the playing field has shifted. And I'd love to just turn to Adrian for a moment and understand a little bit more tell us about Boston Proper, about the company, where you're producing and some of the challenges you're facing today, because you're where the puck went. And now what happened?
Yeah. Thank you, Ken. And that was really good insight. So we're, again, Boston Proper. We sell online. company about 30 years old, but we've been on a kind of a transformation to evolve the business. And our goods are actually, we're about just shy of 90% sourced from China. And it's not for a lack of wanting to diversify or do things differently, but it's where the capacity exists for us. And the way that we create the product, we're not a big company, so our minimums aren't big enough for us to be able to diversify the way that a lot of other retailers do. And we sell a highly embellished product, which for a lot of other retailers, you're using core fabrics, you're using things that, you can actually produce at scale, but that's just not our business model. So it's really pushed us to stay within China because in addition to that, we don't have the logistics to handle all of the inbound freight and duties and all. So we're actually DDP, where it's all the destination duty with deliveries paid. So it's really having a pretty dramatic impact on us because it's roughly a 30% cost increase on our landed cost. And the margins just don't work. So it becomes existential for us. And if things stay in place, our business just doesn't work.
One question people might be asking, why are you still in China? What part of the headline did you miss in 2019, 2020, when Trump added 25% tariff on China then? And one of the key things I think for people to note, and you touched on it, is companies like yours, Ramey Brook. I'm thinking about companies that are around the same size and volume. These companies do smaller runs, and smaller runs now is what China is best known for. They do smaller MOQs. The larger runs went to Vietnam, they went to Malaysia, India, Cambodia. So a lot of companies, smaller businesses, rely on China to stay in business, which when you think about it, one of the big things it seems like the current administration wants to do is help Main Street and not Wall Street. Well, this is where the tariffs are hurting Main Street because, as you just said, your choices now are pretty numbered as to what you are going to do to stay in business. And we'll come back to that in a moment. I do want to switch over to Jan just to get your point of view on what you're seeing out there. You're hearing a lot. You're speaking with many companies. What are you seeing that's happening as a result of the tariffs and how are companies reacting?
Actually, I was having flashbacks. I think Bear and I have a lot in common. I went to work in retail at 8.5. I was in the 26th Walmart store ever built, stocking shelves in Sikeston, Missouri. Now there's 11,000 of them worldwide. And then I spent my life hollowing out all the manufacturing in America. As you probably know, Ken, we were the largest seller of shoes in the United States. We made them all in Taiwan, till we made them all in Korea, till we moved them all to mainland China. We were also the largest seller of bridal gowns, which we finally moved all to mainland China because you could do all that hand beating in a place that was so clean you could eat off the floor, and all of them were white, and we would bring them back here and sell them for $350 to $5,000. So this has been my life. What am I hearing now? It's funny. Not much has actually happened so far, right? We're not raising prices yet because it hasn't actually happened. We haven't shut down the supply chain yet because it hasn't actually happened. Everybody is doing an anticipatory thing. We had the giant freak out in the bond market. It's now all calmed down. We had the giant freak out in the stock market about it. Now we're back to about where we were on Liberation Day. So what am I hearing now from the retailers? It's, oh my God, what do we do if these tariffs stick? Not what's it all going to look like 6 months from now or 3 months from now or sometime in the future. So everybody's, number one, trying to get out of China that can, but they've been trying to do that for 6 years now, trying to get out of China. So we've seen this huge movement out. But now they're trapped going, oh my God, I moved everything to Vietnam. What if the tariff on Vietnam is 45%? I don't think anybody thinks those are going to stick, but they're all having to prepare themselves for what does stick. And taking action right now is really hard because where would you go if you were going to move until you really know, do we wind up with 10% tariffs everywhere and not much else anywhere except for China? Or do we wind up with a whole panoply of from 125 or 45% down to 10% in various places? And until that starts to get clearer, I don't think there's a lot of action going to happen. There's mostly fretting and hand-wringing and lobbying going on. So if you're big enough to lobby, I get it. If you're not big enough to lobby, you're in trouble.
Well, it's interesting. You had Walmart, Home Depot, and Target at the White House a couple days ago. Nothing significant came out of that conversation except the conversation. So not sure where that's going. Haven't heard much from NRF. They've been on the quiet side. I'm not sure what I'm hearing that's positive around lobbying or anything for that matter that's looking to bring this current situation to a quick close.
I'd like to make a comment about that. My comment is I hope the Orange Man stands strong. And I want to say something along with that. I am a lifetime liberal Democrat. My entire family are lifetime liberal Democrats. We should not confuse the fact that the particular emissary of this message may be unpalatable for any number of extraordinarily right reasons. The message that we need to rebalance trade and help the average American who finds himself underemployed. It's not that we don't have high employment, but we often don't look at the fact that my former factory workers in 2011, when we closed, were making $30 to $35 an hour. That same individual now, if he or she is lucky enough to have a job pouring coffee at Starbucks, is making 17 to 20. Is he employed? Yeah, technically. But that's a very different level of existence for someone than when they had a high-paying, semi-skilled or high-skilled job in manufacturing. So I don't want the message to be confused here. And I responded in particular because I thought your eloquence in your message to the Trump administration was exactly that. It was well-reasoned and it was eloquent. It didn't take political jibe at the particular individual. Instead, it took a macro look from one vantage point about how this is affecting present businesses like Adrian's. But we all must think about something. And this is an odd and abstract concept, but I think everybody can do it. Let's pretend for a moment that there was only one country, and that one country happens, to our benefit, to be the United States. I wouldn't want to run this exercise if I lived in Saudi Arabia in the desert, right? Because there you wouldn't have necessarily all of the raw means, materials, minerals, energy, population, etc. Here in the United States, we have every single raw input we need, from farming to rare earth materials, to be able to completely sustain our population without doing $1 in trade. Not $1. And so while we do live in a global economy and a global society, and for lots of reasons, it makes great sense to trade, the fact is we do not need to trade. How then does a country with the amount of raw input riches that we have, intellectually, educationally, and all of the other input, how do we find ourselves today in this position where so many people have been displaced and we have not been able as a nation to figure out how we're going to bring us all along? So I put that to the group, and you're welcome to tear me to pieces.
Hey, well, I'm not going to tear you to pieces. I voted for the guy 3 times. So let's go from there. The town I grew up in had 20,000 people when I was growing up there. It now has 1,700. Everything that we did in that town is now being done in China. So I resonate completely with what you're saying. I'm a supporter of free, fair trade. We've
Absolutely.
never had free, fair trade. We've only had free trade. And yes, I'm a firm believer that we should have countervailing tariffs versus countries who have tariffs on us. And I think we should have tariffs on countries who do not allow us to trade in their country on a fair basis. Japan, I'm looking at you. China, I'm looking at you. So I'm not opposed to tariffs. I'm not opposed to taxes. I'm not opposed to value-added taxes. I'm not opposed to whatever it is that it takes to balance the trade out. Tariffs just a tax. I don't like tariffs in the respect that they are regressive. But from the point of view of accomplishing fair trade, I don't see another possibility. Because, as I said, we used to land a shoe from China for $356, sell it for $10 here. We couldn't make it for $10 here. So there was no way that the whole shoe industry wasn't going to go to China. That's going to be true on anything that the Chinese government decides to support. They're less supportive now of the kind of manufacturing that we always got. They're more supportive of tech and heavy metal bending and all that stuff. But they used to support everything. And that's how everything wound up on the ground in China at, as you said, half the price.
Or less, one industry at a time. China couldn't afford to do this en masse across the board on all industries simultaneously. They didn't have the wealth to do it. They didn't have the knowledge base to do it. But one industry at a time, they cherry-picked industries that were on their ascension. They harvested the IP. They bankrupted the American or Western European companies. Then those factory owners, manufacturers, and IP creators trying to feed their own families got on airplanes, flew over to China, like all of the guys I used to compete with did, taught those people how to not only improve and make the product better, but to pass all the American and European safety regulations and understand trends and all of the rest of the stuff that, again, is very country-specific knowledge. We taught those people how to fish. Now, we all know the proverb. Teaching those folks how to fish was fine, but I love what you said, Jan, when you talked about free and fair. I also feel deeply for people like Adrian. What business requires anywhere in the world and in any industry in the world is the stability of knowing what are the goalposts, what are the side yards, what are the rules within which we must make decisions, because business doesn't make decisions like this. We are thinking 3 years or 5 years or 10 years out. And when we invest capital, when we decide to hire and train workers, particularly in countries where disposing of those workers is expensive or difficult or illegal, welcome to Germany, we can't just fix 30 years of despicably bad trade policy in 3 months. That's not possible. It's unreasonable. No thinking person thinks that will work. However, let's be fair. Every single administration that has existed, the last time we had a presidential candidate who argued vehemently against the dangers of unfair yet free trade was Ross Perot. I think that was 86, right? And it didn't matter, Democrat or Republican, lobbying on all sides. Everybody sort of thought, hey, isn't this a great way for us to pump up our margins, increase our volumes, simplify the challenge of building our products in the United States? So I don't think you can lay the blame on an administration. I don't think you can lay the blame on a Democrat or Republican philosophy. I don't think you can lay it on government versus business. But we must take a moment, look at what's happened to the country and ask ourselves, if we do another 2 decades in the way that we've been doing it, what will our nation look like? And how prepared will we really be to defend ourselves against anything, not just militarily, but things like COVID happening?
Well, look, in many ways, this is a COVID moment for a number of companies that are in apparel, footwear, electronics. I mean, this is a COVID moment. And I want to go back to Adrian. I'd like to understand, what are you doing at this juncture based on where things are? I mean, I hear you, Jan. It's almost like don't do anything yet, but every day is like a week for, especially in Adrian's spot where you have, are you producing? Can I afford payroll? What are you doing? How are you handling this time? And what steps are you taking to protect the company?
So, sorry, there was just a lot in the last comment, but the reality is we're going to have to try to plan in a place where there's literally no way to plan, right? So we're coming up with different scenarios, but there's no scenario where this isn't going to be painful for the people that work here, because, I mean, we don't make great profit margins. We don't. And I wish we did, right? We're working on that, but we don't. So it's not a question of, oh, well, we can just make less money. It's a question of whether or not we're going to be able to pay people. So right now, while things have not happened yet, they're happening for us because we are not the importer of record. We're unable to actually get product made, period, because no one's going to make a commitment without us making a commitment in saying that we're going to pay 30% more on a landed cost basis. So every moment for us, every day, I'm waking up and looking at the news and it feels like a week, because the decisions that we have to make right now, we're making as if it's a worst case scenario because I have no choice. And the challenge is that, again, it's going to be painful. And it's a question of how painful.
Bear, one thing you said before that's interesting, and it's about goalposts. It's about setting a time horizon. It's about giving people a chance to make some smart decisions. And that's what's missing in this equation. I don't know how you can reverse 30 years of, call it bad policy, call it unfavorable, or allowing unfair trade to carry on. I'm not going to challenge that because I think it's true. We've allowed a lot to happen, but the country, the U.S. has also prospered since, and we are at 4% low, which is very low unemployment, and it may not be the same job that one person had before, but we can't go back. I don't think you can go back. I don't think we can make apparel in this country and put out an average retail of $17 a shirt. You and I both know you can't find labor for that price.
Why do we think a shirt should cost $17?
That's just the average of what we Americans pay for a shirt.
Sure.
I'm not passing judgment. That's just an average shirt price. The average factory worker makes $30 an hour. That's loaded. You produce 3 shirts an hour. You got probably $4 worth of fabric. You got $3 worth of overhead. At cost, you're at what the darn thing's retailing for today. Back to your no margin problem.
How's that $17 shirt hold up after it's been through the washing machine 20 or 30 times?
We can play the game. The bottom line is you're up against economies in this world that are producing at a 10% of what we could produce goods for. So you can put better quality in there. That's an average price shirt. I mean, the labor isn't going to necessarily change the quality. I can improve the fabric. I can run fabric through any fabric line and increase the cost of a shirt, but we can't compete. We can't produce that kind of product in this country. We just can't do it.
We can't, only insofar as money's like water. It flows to the low spot and it flows there fast, right? Businesses scramble always to do what they can to control their costs. And it's very natural that when trading partners have a legitimate advantage, I hang on the word legitimate, right? That the money is going to flow in that direction. As I mentioned, commodity prices around the world are what they are. And so if you believe that absent the subsidy of the raw material inputs, the world has an equitable base upon which we can compete, then you're down to, well, labor, right? Or environmental regulations, or taxation, or other controllable variables. When you look at the way that the average human being finds themselves working in a factory in the United States, a factory in Western Europe, or a factory in Southeast Asia, I don't think there's anybody on the call that would agree that those inputs are equitable. I've been to these factories. I'm sure you all have too. You can't imagine that the right price of the shirt, therefore, is $17. It isn't. But we've addicted American consumers to believing that they ought to be able to go out to their favorite fast fashion, it's like fast food, and they ought to be able to buy 20 shirts in a month, wear it once or twice, toss it in the trash, and make sure it piles up in a giant heap in Brazil. I've seen the photos. It's absolutely insane, right? Or how about all those microplastics creating that garbage patch in the ocean? These are decisions that we make as a population here that have all kinds of impacts, environmentally, economically, and about the human rights of workers around the world. Do I feel terribly that Adrian's business is going to get caught in the crossfire as we have to rejigger our thinking here? Of course I do. I went through losing my 20-year business and all those 100-hour weeks and all of the effort that went into it. So I know what that means and how that feels in real time. I'll never forget it. I still have nightmares and I sometimes still cry. That given, what is the alternative to beginning to right this ship so that workers around the world are treated fairly and equitably, so that we all can be free trading partners because we're holding one another to responsible standards? I get that this is not the way that people imagined it should happen or a time frame that's comfortable. But can we at least agree that we're now talking in a real way and thinking through what can this look like? What should this look like? And we haven't done that as a group in any real way in the 35 years that I've been in business. So I thank the administration and all of its buffoonery, puffery, and idiocy for forcing the conversation to be happening.
Yeah, I think the way it's happening is wrong. There's got to be time to do this in a much more responsible way. And I got to disagree with you, Bear. It's great to bring it up, but you can't put companies out of business after 30 years of malpractice. And that's what we're doing. Jan, you've been quiet. I know that's not easy. So I'm going to turn to you for a second.
First of all, I don't agree with you that it can't be made here. In 2015, 10 years ago, I wrote a 25-year look forward for CNBC, and I did a lot of work on it for their 25th anniversary. And I said at the time that AI, 3D printing, and automatic knitting machines would make all manufacturing local. If you're going to sell it here, you make it here. You're going to sell it in China, you make it in China. If you're going to sell it someplace else in the world, you make it there. Would that bring jobs back? No, because it would be all automated. But it does mean we'd be building more factories, more warehouses, more distribution centers. We'd be employing more technicians to maintain equipment. We'd be generating more demand for services like electricity, cleaning service, security, all of that. And you could do it here. It still might be more expensive than making it someplace else. But if you put a tariff on that says, we're going to make this fair and fair, we could bring manufacturing back, but we can't bring jobs back.
I couldn't agree more on that point. I know we heard from the Commerce Secretary who thought we could have millions of people assembling iPhones. I don't think we'll be seeing that.
No, but we could have dozens of robots doing it 24 hours a day.
Automation could make that happen, but people aren't going to make it happen. And I think it's interesting, Bear. My feeling is this country, as it has pivoted, has done a lot of things, creative things to make up for the lost jobs. Technology. We are probably the most creative country in the world. I want to go back to your story because I think that's very interesting. You are, I would say you're up there around that genius level when it comes to creativity. Just tell us a little bit about the current business that you're doing and where you're doing it.
Look, I have been in electronics one way or another since the get-go. I was inspired to become involved in the electronics industry because a neighbor was the CEO of a company called Surtech Electronics in Stanley, Kansas. They built parts for the military, for the space shuttles, all kinds of really advanced aerospace-grade electronics parts. And Larry would stop at the bus stop because he knew I was the weird kid that didn't fit in very well in high school. And he'd say, you want to go to school today or do you want to go to school today? And he'd roll down the window in these 560 SEC and I'd say, I want to go to school today. And so he'd call the high school on the way to the electronics manufacturing plant. And I would get a master class from Larry about what it is to design, engineer, and build great things and the people who make that happen and the processes that allow a factory to work. And then I would skip school that day and work in the factory. And so for me, the earnest nature of designing, engineering, and building products and doing it under your own supervision, your own hands, and using your friends and neighbors around this country to be a part of that success and that work, there is nothing more satisfying than doing that. I think every entrepreneur, every business owner feels a level of pride in knowing that they're responsible for making decisions that enable themselves and some number of their employees to live a better life. So when I look at the fact that I lost my big manufacturing company and I had to start over again, and I had that choice that so many others had, am I going to go sally up to the bar next to people half a world away, or am I going to try and outthink them? Well, because I'm a bit of a masochist or an idiot or both, I said, I'm going to outthink them. And so I wrote some more patents and I created some new technology. And our company is helping to usher in a whole new generation of wearable tech products. We happen to call them ear computers, and they are exactly what they sound like. They're little computers that go inside your head. And certainly before I die, which is depending on how that goes, at least 10 years off, we expect to be able to implant this technology right into your head. Now, that kind of real future think is something America has always been fantastic at. I certainly don't hold any particular advantage over a friend or a neighbor any place else in this country. We've always been able to dream big, and our country has provided the resources that we need to be able to act big. we didn't get to where we were as a nation because we're slackers. We're lazy. We've got low IQ. We're lacking resources. So I have a great deal of pride in the idea that we can think our way through this and beyond this. And I do believe that whether you're manufacturing shirts or refrigerators or in-ear computers or cars, there are ways to do that here in this country more efficiently than they can be done anywhere in the world when those inputs are balanced fairly.
Hey, Ken, have you read Hillbilly Elegy?
Yes.
I read it when it first came out. I lived Hillbilly Elegy. And then, like Judas, I went out and turned around and took all the jobs those people would have had and moved them to China. So, number one, I have a big chip on my shoulder about being the bad guy. I'd move it all back tomorrow if I could. But when you say we're trying to do it too fast and it's going to destroy a lot of businesses, you're probably right. But here's what I know. If they don't start now, they'll never start. They never started the whole time I was doing it. Nobody ever said to us, we're going to tariff those things so you can't bring them in. Or we're going to make you live up to whatever standards you had to live up to in America to bring that product in. And nobody ever checked to see really too closely how old those people were making those products or any of that stuff. And I know you were the same way.
When was the last time any of us read an article about the suicide nets being sewn around an American manufacturing plant? Wait, you didn't. Because our workers don't jump from the... But there's an actual word for that, defenestration. God, what a vocabulary word. People jumping out of windows because their quality of life is that bad. They need nets around a building. Shame on us for allowing this to happen. I have my own little reform issue, Jan, that's not dissimilar to yours. When I had my big factory, do you know what I did? I created too much offall, too much waste. And I paid thousands and thousands of dollars a month to have this very complex compaction and grinding system to take all that waste and chew it up. Ken remembers, we flew it up over the top of my building in giant pipes and then down into 40-yard containers, and the trucks would come and haul this stuff off. And I didn't give one thought to where that stuff was going. Not that many years ago, I could go down to my house at the Lake of the Ozarks and I could fish. And I could eat the fish that came out of the lake, right? Last time I pulled a fish out of the lake at Lake of the Ozarks, it had a plastic bag coming out of its mouth and through its gills on the side. Foam and trash floats up next to my dock. And jerks like me helped make the products and sell the products that wreaked havoc on our environment. Like the smoker who's reformed and then has a no smoking sign on every surface in his house and car. I feel that way about environmental causes and sustainability. So I appreciate, Jan, that you said you got some payback to do and that if you could figure out the way to bring it all back, you'd do it differently. I'm trying to do that with the products that I make today that are 100% renewable and sustainable, and they're electronics. That's a very hard thing to do. It's very expensive, and it means I can't sell things like AirPods at the prices that those things sell. But in the years that I have left, what I can do is I can live by a creed that I can be proud of at the end of my life. I can say I did some things that were not great, and I tried my best to correct my motion so that I create a smaller wake and create better benefits for more people in the process. What you said about someone's got to start is right. Now, what I'd really like to hear, if we have time, Ken, does anybody have other ideas about how do we take the basics of this idea of trying to get it squared up a little bit and the realities of, in a two-party system, there's going to be a midterm election in less than 2 years. If you're Trump, if you're Musk, if you're all these guys, like him or hate him, that are sitting in the power chair, and you see that administration after administration, outside of their first few hundred days in office, gets nothing done for the entirety of the rest of their term because they're already back into the political cycle. Can we not see that the orange man has a gun against his head right now? That if he doesn't move quickly, we can't even test the efficacy of any of these theories. So if you remember Art of the Deal, right? Trump was always about arguing from this ridiculous point way out here, and then at some point in time, bringing it down to something more reality-based. I think that's obviously what he's started to do with the tariffs. I've never seen somebody fumble the ball more in the last 3 weeks. I mean, my God. But something might be a compromise solution. Does anybody know what that compromise might look like?
Well, less tariffs than we're seeing today. I mean, I hear you. Again, I'll go back to how it's.
Yeah, we're not seeing any tariffs today.
Yeah.
We don't have a clue.
We have 10% tariffs. Those are in place.
Well, we'd take those anytime. We could do that. We could pass them through.
I'm making more aware, back to your question, Bear. Really, Adrian, if you had to pick a number that you could live with, and I know it's not 145%, and it probably may not be 10%, but what number would that, what's the worst case scenario that would allow Boston Proper to continue and then still try and figure out where do we go with this? Where is the right place to end?
It's probably realistically somewhere not 145%, maybe 30%. And that's still stretching margins, right? I mean, no other big retailer would ever want to accept that. But I don't disagree with the concepts that are being articulated. It comes down to execution. So where I appreciate that you don't want to see something like this happen. Well, it doesn't have to, right? The people don't have to lose their jobs because of this if it's done in a measured way. And you're right about the conversation, but there are other ways to approach this. And I think that I don't even think that the first, again, regardless of the politics of it all, I don't think that the first tariffs were necessarily a bad idea with China. It didn't move manufacturing back to the U.S. It just moved it to other countries. But I don't disagree with it conceptually at all. It always comes down to the execution. And it's just unnecessary. Like, this is just unnecessary.
Certainly a lot of pain out there. Jan, what if you had to take a look at your crystal ball? You think this is a matter of weeks before we see some change, or when do we get the first tariff deal done? I mean, that would add a little bit more confidence. We start to see some deals getting done. I hear India's pretty close. Maybe Japan's close. I'm worried about Vietnam. I think Scott Besson said last week, and maybe he was responding to what the Chinese said, but Besson said they're looking for countries to not go forward and support the Chinese. And the Chinese at the same time said there better not be a country that's looking to not support us. So I see countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia in the crosshairs here. I don't know what they're supposed to do, but if I had to guess, they're not going to be at 10%. They're going to be higher because there's going to be a lot of China in Vietnam and in Malaysia and in Cambodia. I think it just continues to move out of the country and move elsewhere.
Well, my message, unlike yours to Trump, is pretty simple. Get it done and announced with Japan, India, Mexico, Canada, and then the EU. And then just tell everyone else what it's going to be, because we're never going to get a deal with China. So there's 100 companies. You ask who's 100 nations lobbying Trump right now. When you ask who's lobbying, they're lobbying harder than any of the companies are. There's 100 of them. But if they could strike deals with those and say, this is the model, this is the way we're going to do business going forward, and then just say, okay, 10% tariff on everything, and then countervailing stuff. If you're going to put something else on, we're going to countervail. And if you don't allow us into the country like Japan doesn't, if our cars aren't coming there, yours ain't coming here. And then you're done. So that leaves, what do we do about the really big problem, which is China? I don't see China ever getting resolved, because every time we've struck a deal with China, China has basically backed up and said, yeah, we're not going to do that. And we haven't managed to make them stop taking intellectual property. We haven't managed to make them not support businesses and have predatory pricing coming into the States. We've never been able to stop any of that. We haven't been able to keep them from transshipping to avoid any kind of a tariff. So I see us striking a deal with the rest of the world, but I don't see us striking a deal with China. I see that being tariff and restrictions.
Sorry, Jan, but just to understand, we're not striking a deal with China. You see this 145% tariff embargo that's in place now, that continuing? I mean, that's clearly too high. Trump said it's ridiculously high. Does it just come down to something like 50%, but it's still in place? What do you mean by no deal with China?
I don't believe China will ever sign a deal that they will live up to. I don't think we'll ever have a deal with China that they can live with. So if they can't live with it, either we sign something and roll over and play dead, or we never get a deal and we wind up with high countervailing tariffs forever. And they wind up sending stuff to Vietnam and trying to get it to come into here, and sending stuff to Canada and building plants other places and all the things they would do to try to avoid the tariffs. But I don't see how we're going to strike. I think we can strike a deal with 100 countries. I don't think we can strike a deal with China that will be fair, free trade ever.
Jan, I couldn't agree more with you on that. I think we've got a clash of egos and a clash of cultures. And those are very difficult things to overcome in a productive negotiation. I don't think there's anybody that believes that our current president is a level-headed negotiator. And I don't know very many people that would say the same thing about the president of China. These men, it's like Putin. These men, they're driven by very different objectives than the ones that we may all have. And in many ways, that does not inure to our benefit. But if we were to get deals done with the rest of the world and China finds itself an island, I got to tell you, that's a bummer for China.
For sure.
Won't hurt the United States one iota.
And do you really want to be bringing product out of China when the landing craft hit the beaches?
Well, on that note, I think I'll summarize and say the following. Strong argument. Bear, thank you for taking the side. And
thank you for having me.
And I understand where you are based on where you've been. I think a little bit of a pipe dream to try to bring back certain elements of manufacturing. I also think there are many people in this country that don't want a facility near them. Our requirements to build manufacturing, to maintain, are very high, as they should be, to protect the environment. I also do wish that we just, as we discussed, had a lot more time to do this in a proactive way than a reactive way, because it is going to hurt many companies. And until we have clarity, it'll pretty much wipe out this year. I don't know how retailers can plan the fourth quarter when they can't really see clearly through tomorrow. We need clarity one way or the other. Tell us what it's going to be. Let us go forward. Let us figure out what we got to do. But it's going to involve a lot of cuts if the tariffs are high. I am strongly in favor, as both Jan and Bear mentioned, I am strongly in favor of reciprocal tariffs. Do unto others as others do unto you. They won't take our cars. We won't take their cars. So I think reciprocal tariffs, and that was really the path that Trump went down. I think that was what many in the country voted for. That was his view on tariffs. I think he obviously varied. He's looking at trying to right the trade imbalance, which you can't right because we're always going to be the biggest consumer of goods in the world. So that's bad math. But hopefully we can come up with some clear decision that allows us to get back to business and puts the markets back in the right place and gets us doing things in a more positive way. And with that, thank you, gentlemen. We'll end this flight of the Retail Pilot. Thanks for tuning in to this week's flight of the Retail Pilot. And please give us a review on your favorite podcast platform.